You're probably not going to be able to launch a super successful general EVM L2 anymore. I think the market is learning that. Omni exists to empower developers to build across all rollups, accessing all the users. That is why we built it. When we are dealing in a world where transaction fees are so cheap, using something like a sovereign rollup, it's going to be fractions of a penny. You can make it so that you don't force the users to pay for gas. I am bearish on the idea of Ethereum just becoming a DA layer.
Welcome to the Interop. Today I'm here with Austin King. He's co-founder of Omni and CEO of Omni Labs. We're going to be diving deep into Omni today, understanding their architecture and how they allow Ethereum L2s to scale and better interoperate. Before we get started, make sure to hit the like button to get notified when new episodes drop. And remember that none of what we discuss here on the Interop is investment advice. And if you enjoyed this content, please consider staking with us. We're validating on a handful of networks. And of course, if you're heading to Brussels for ECC, I really encourage you to come to Nebula Summit. It's happening on July 12th and 13th. It's going to be a massive gathering of Cosmos builders, founders, and investors. And I'd really love it if you come. We're going to have many of the podcast guests speaking at the conference. And of course, investor speed dating will also be happening on day one. So if you're raising funds and want to meet some of the top tier investors in the space, definitely register for that as well. You can get tickets and register for investor speed dating at nebular.builders. And I have a special treat for the Interop listeners. We have a 50% discount if you use the code Interop at checkout. So go ahead and get your tickets. And of course, if you're a student, Nebula Summit is free. So just register for a student ticket and we'll be happy to have you. Austin, I'm really bummed out you guys can't come this year. Maybe we'll have to do another event with you guys at some point. But yeah, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, 100%. Appreciate you having me.
So let's get started here. Maybe to start things off, what were you doing before working in Omni, and how did you want to start focusing your time on building blockchain infrastructure to improve scaling in Ethereum?
Yeah. So, my original journey into crypto started about like 7.5 years ago. But, we can skip over a number of those years. I think the best way to actually understand Omni is to understand the step that happened right before Omni. So we built a DeFi protocol on L1. This was a couple years ago at this point. And this was just when the Ethereum ecosystem started to wrap its head around okay, we are heading in the direction of a roll-up centric roadmap. And so it became clear all right, this is where we're going for anybody in the research community at that point in time. Even though it was kind of far from prod ready. It was clear that if Ethereum had a future, this was going to be it. And so we started to think about how we would scale our DeFi protocol across these different L2s. It went pretty well on L1. We got 50 mil TVL in 2 days. And so we knew that a majority of the activity would be on rollups in the future. So we wanted to position our protocol to thrive during that transition. As we started to get deeper into it, though, we were talking with a number of our colleagues, and basically anybody who's doing well on L1 was thinking about this problem, just strategically, how do they position themselves well for a future where there's a number of L2s on Ethereum. And so at a certain point, we realized that instead of just building the solution for ourselves, and specifically for our own protocol, that if we built it in a generalized way, we could serve other builders in the ecosystem. And it's just pretty strong signal to us that all of our most successful colleagues were thinking about this same problem. So we decided to pivot full time into building Omni as a generalized infra layer for the Ethereum community instead of for our own DeFi specific protocol.
When executing this transition from a DeFi protocol to now building infra, what was the biggest lift, or what was the biggest challenge in going from an application to core infrastructure that now caters developers and other types of users?
Yeah. Structurally, there's many things that changed. So previously, we only wrote smart contracts, and we still write smart contracts today. But we also had to build an entire independent network around them. So there's a lot of Go code that runs Omni as well. So we had to expand the team with people who had proficiencies in different areas other than smart contract development. And a lot of the like go-to-market strategy really came down far more to yeah, like we shifted to being a developer-facing product instead of a capital deployer focused product. So the target customer shifted as well. So there were impacts on both engineering and on the go-to-market side as well.
Yeah, yeah, of course. I want to talk a little bit about, the current state of the cycle. There's this
Mm,
uh, there's this great post. I should have it here in front of me, but basically the thesis of this post is that cycles go from like infrastructure focus to
mm,
application focus, and
yep.
the technology basically moves in this kind of like infrastructure application kind of pull back and forth, right? And that this goes back to the dawn of innovation and the dawn of technology. And I think in crypto, this mirrors a little bit what we typically expect, where bear markets are infrastructure focused and like bull markets tend to attract more applications like DeFi, like NFTs, like SocialFi, and things like that. Typically, we've
Mhm.
seen these in bull markets. What state of the cycle are we
Yep.
in your view? Because it feels to me like we are in a bull cycle, but still, I think the majority of the deals that we see as a fund are infrastructure. We see very few applications, and the few applications that there are have a very hard time raising and really kind of gaining attraction and gaining traction from users. Is there too much infrastructure? Are we going to be able to leverage all this block space, or at least will all this block space be used at some point in the
Mhm.
future?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm totally with you. We really have had about 2.5, 3 years of heavy infrastructure focus. I think, the like where the app's at has been a common question. It's like, okay, everybody just keeps raising for infrastructure projects. Nobody's raising for applications. I think we're at a point though in the industry, and I think this is being reflected in some like things we're seeing out in the landscape. Like you're probably not going to be able to launch a super successful general EVM L2 anymore. I think the market is learning that. Whereas 6 months ago, that probably would have gotten some good terms for investment. So I think there's a number of things here. There's like, how good is the actual infrastructure? Can people build new types of applications? And then on the capital deployment side, it's like, is it going to seem rational to VCs to continue allocating to infra projects at this point? I think we may be over allocated to infra, but that was fundamentally necessary. If you look at the app layer, we didn't, a lot of innovation stalled. So many of the applications that are out there are just like forks of what happened previously. It's like a lending fork, a DEX fork. And that's from my perspective because it's an extremely constrained design space. I think, we can get into the different like impacts of all this different modular innovation and what that will empower at the app layer. But I do think we are kind of, if we're talking about it like a pendulum of infra to app, I think we're swinging towards apps now because we just hit the point where we can sew a bunch of these different modular pieces together to create fundamentally new, like a fundamentally new design space at the application layer.
Yeah, what do you think that design space opens up in terms of applications?
hmm I think we'll be able to build non-degen applications. That's my take on it. Um, right now, I think the user experience is stuck in a degen brain space. And that's because we make people buy a volatile asset and then send it to a network before they can do anything. So it fundamentally locks them in like before I use anything, I have to go buy something that might go down in price. So it's hard to mentally escape that like, all right, this is an investing thing. I need to like think about how I make money back here. Um, when we are dealing in a world where transaction fees are so cheap, using something like a sovereign rollup, it's going to be fractions of a penny. Uh, you can make it so that you don't force the users to pay for gas. You can actually, and especially account abstraction will make this much easier. But you can make it so that users won't even need to know that they're using crypto. They'll just be able to sign in with email and just make transactions. I think the substantial increases in performance throughput and capacity for abstraction will open that like new application design space that is less degen focused.
I wonder to what extent those applications really need blockchains still, because as you abstract things away, like private keys, users full control over funds, etc. And also I think as we move away from applications that are financial in nature,
Mhm.
the utility of a blockchain starts to erode a little bit. I think. Like, I'm not saying that SocialFi doesn't have like interesting use cases, or that AI and crypto don't have interesting use cases,
Hmm.
but they feel a little bit less pertinent and maybe important than the financial ones. I mean, the financial ones I feel are deeply rooted with values and political positions as well, about like what money should look like, and people's like financial freedoms. Whereas these other applications, I think, have a little bit less of that. So yeah, it starts getting into, for me at least, starts getting into this kind of weird territory where it's like, okay, how much of this is actually useful and how much is just kind of like a fancy use case for a blockchain?
Hmm. Yeah.
Similar to a lot of the hype around blockchains in enterprise in like the sort of mid 2010s, right? Where
Yeah,
every
yeah.
enterprise was trying to build a
Supply chain,
blockchain.
Yeah.
Supply chain, like, let's, I built and built a failed company around this very this very use case and pitch. So like, yeah, what are your thoughts on that? And like,
Hmm.
are users, do users actually sort of care that SocialFi applications exist, and does a blockchain SocialFi application really introduce novel use cases for users that are that far away from the existing kind of social network infrastructure or like application space?
Hmm. Yeah. So I actually totally disagree with you on this. So let's chat about it. The My perspective comes downstream of the fact that blockchains as a technology empower us with property rights on the internet. That is the lens in which I look at things. Money, having having the ability to own money, obviously is extremely important. But property rights are impactful throughout society for things far beyond just money. And so I'm thinking much more widely than just SocialFi. I think this much more is about empowering people with provable ownership in a digital space. Because right now, we effectively rely on like five companies in order to attribute ownership over things. And, with that, we know it's not ownership because nobody's making money off their like online presence. And those that are explicitly like paying a significant amount of that to these five corporations. And so that's the lens through which I look at it. It's not about like having tweets that are directly attributable to you. It's about having your entire online presence provably owned by every individual out there, aka like digital property rights.
Yeah, no, I think like that narrative makes sense. I just, to me, it comes back to this idea of like, in the end, do people care? Right? There was this
Hmm.
whole moment in, right, 2018, 2019, when privacy kind of came to the forefront. I believe it was when WhatsApp changed their terms. I can't remember exactly what, but basically like a bunch of people started using Signal, including myself. Yeah, I saw it as essentially, folks moving over to Signal because like a lot of people were also moving over to Signal, not really understanding what was happening there. And then if eventually like nobody uses Signal anymore except for people like us who are sort of nerds and privacy conscious.
Hmm.
But the majority of people don't care. And yeah, I mean, I get the argument. I just I guess I'm like a bit cynical here
I would
at
argue
this
that
point.
like
Yeah.
what I'm saying is not that people are going to shift downstream of because something is private. I think we're going to be able to create fundamentally new types of like networks and applications out of this that provide direct utility. The selling point to end users, the selling point to end users is not, hey, this is more private or hey, control your own data. It's, what just like at a much more left curve level. Like, what are they deriving utility from?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think anybody that goes to market on like this is the privacy X, I, if it's end user facing, it's probably not going to go that well. And I think we have seen many different laps in companies attempting that, and none of them, I think, have succeeded anywhere near the scale that companies that did not focus on that as the core value proposition have seen in the market.
Yeah. I mean, I want it to happen, man. I mean, like
Yeah, if you're using Signal, I imagine, but
no, I want it to happen. Like I would love a user owned alternative to what we currently have, where users drive not only value creation but also accrue value their from their data, from their usage of a platform, are able to govern the platform, etc. Right? Like I
I
think these are really
Mhm.
laudable use cases when it comes to crypto. Um, yeah,
In my opinion, it's actually when we're thinking about it from a consumer like end user facing perspective, I don't think anybody's going to want to govern things. People don't even like vote in the country that they live in sometimes, let alone helping manage some online application that they use. I think what is going to be more compelling is the fact that, and you see this in open source cultures, where everybody can contribute freely and the rate of innovation accelerates instead of just being like closed down in a proprietary platform. External innovation slows. And so I think it's more about betting on an ecosystem of people being able to collaborate better. People who don't trust each other can cooperate better at large over the internet. And I think that applies specifically at the innovation layer, where we'll see new primitives come out, people start building around them, other people start building around these new things that people layered on top. So I think it's more about facilitating open innovation across all these different platforms, and that'll lead to better user experiences and new types of applications.
yeah, absolutely. Well, let's maybe switch gears a little bit here. One thing we were talking about here before the show was what is Ethereum,
Yeah.
and we were kind of joking about the fact that Ethereum and also Cosmos are stuck in this identity crisis right now. I think they're slightly different, but they have a lot of similarities. So yeah, from your perspective, like what's happening in Ethereum right now, where um,
Mhm.
that is causing this confusion and maybe this pull in different direction.
Yeah. It's actually very funny phrasing it that way because you can look directly at some history is repeating itself in many ways. With Atom 2.0, we're like, okay, we're going to be sharing security from the hub. It's like restaking Ethereum. And this is downstream of the fact that people are like, what is this core L1 network here for? From my perspective, the reason that I love the Ethereum community is one, the community and the like innovation that happens there. I feel it's like very genuine and like just most aligned with my personal values of actually trying to create sovereign software for people across the world. But I do think Ethereum is going through an identity crisis right now, where the obvious technical path to scaling Ethereum was L2s, but that kind of destroyed the existing business model. And a lot of people are wondering what happens next and what they should even optimize for with the core L1 network. Like, should this become a shared sequencer thing? Should it focus on issuing pre-confirmations to different L2 platforms? Or should it just be a DA layer? I don't think there's consensus around what we are trying to optimize it for. So I do feel fragmentation in the mind share of the Ethereum ecosystem of where people are trying to take things in a way similar to what happened to Cosmos over the past, like 5+ years.
Yeah, as you're saying that, I'm reminded of like having a conversation with my excellent co-host over at Epicenter, Meher Roy, right around the time this Ethereum kind of roll-up centric roadmap post came out and Ethereum 2.0 was rolling out, and he basically was sort of predicting this very problem that proof of stake and the roll up centric roadmap would put into question the Ethereum business model of accruing fees,
Hmm.
and
Yep.
and it looks like that has sort of come to pass. Where do you think we go from here? With restaking and then roll
Hmm.
ups, like what is the best outcome for Ethereum layer one in this new reality, right? Where like
Hmm.
these things are not going away.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it is fascinating. I think if you think about the ultrasound money meme, that really threw people off course. Personally, that's my take. That it was. I don't know how helpful it was to push that meme because now it's not ultrasound. ETH is inflationary again because a majority of the activity happening in the Ethereum network happens on L2s now. And L1 captures way less in fees downstream of that. So it was honestly incredible that Ethereum was deflationary for a bit. Like, that is astounding that we were able to create a decentralized network at the scale of Ethereum and have it be ultrasound money. Like, this thing is literally deflationary. Um, that's not happening anymore, though. The network now, after we have 4844, so like blobs on Ethereum, it's inflationary again. So that I think has just whiplashed people a decent amount. And understandably, it makes complete sense why people would be confused about that. Moving forward, I am bearish on the idea of Ethereum just becoming a DA layer. I think that is, I don't think that has a compelling business model. And it has so much tech debt when you compare it to new platforms that,
Yeah.
just can use the latest innovations and simply offer a better product. So I'm quite bearish on that future. If I'm thinking in terms of somebody who cares about ETH, the asset, I think a lot of people are biased by that though, and they think about ETH, the asset, instead of Ethereum, the network. The reason I care so much about Ethereum is because it's the most decentralized network that we have out there. And so it can provide the highest guarantees on a number of security dimensions. That I think is where Ethereum really excels compared to some of these other networks. And so I'm not a huge fan of some of these proposals that are out there for like reducing the validator set and like putting constraints there. So I think that's what Ethereum really excels at, being this like massively distributed core layer that can, yeah, just achieve the highest levels of decentralization and ideally censorship resistance on top of that. So that's what I would prefer if the Ethereum community optimized for. I don't know if that's the best business model, but that's me thinking about like what I think the world needs, not how do I make ETH go up.
Yeah, I think you're right about ETH not being a great DA layer. Um, yeah, I mean, it can't compete with the likes of Celestia and
Yeah.
Avail and like EigenDA in terms of
Hmm.
technical advancement. Like this technical debt, I think, just puts it as a disadvantage. The community, the highly decentralized nature of Ethereum, the highly aligned values of that ecosystem, I think, are its strongest attributes. And I guess the question is like, what is that useful for?
Hmm.
What do these things allow Ethereum to become?
Hmm.
And I think that one candidate is for Ethereum to serve as a ZK verification layer for most of crypto, where it's just like does ZK proof verification very reliably in a credibly um, credibly neutral way with a decentralized network of validators that will just reliably do that at scale, possibly with like kind of super proofs, the likes of which like Electron are building. Yeah, wonder what you think of that.
Yeah, I think it is such a fascinating design space to look at. If you think about all the lessons we have learned from the time that we originally launched Ethereum, we understand far more about the different properties here and the different like layers, really. I think Celestia has done a great job with helping people understand like, no, it's not blockchains. It's like more akin to Web 2, honestly, where they're going to be, we're going to call them modular networks, but really they're like microservices in the decentralized stack. That's how I think about it. And, you're talking about this like recursively, super proof, I think you said, but just like a proof that aggregates into other proofs and then just gets submitted to a base network. That's a pretty elegant architecture. But like there's so much social momentum and liquidity and users already on the existing Ethereum network that if we could relaunch everything clean slate today, might it make sense for the core L1 network that is maximizing for decentralization to just verify ZK proofs? Yeah, that's honestly a pretty elegant architecture. But we're dealing with this world where there's so much momentum already that yeah, we'll see like what we can make happen here. But if we think about it from an entirely removed engineering perspective, that would be a pretty cool architecture.
Yeah, I mean, I totally forgot that also Ethereum has liquidity,
Yeah.
also one of its very strong attributes compared to other
Hmm.
ecosystems. Let's talk about Omni here. So, what's the vision, and maybe talking a little bit about the architecture?
Hmm.
In this roll-up centric world in which we live, what purpose does Omni serve? And looking at the way that roll-up ecosystem looks like today, what's the desirable outcome that Omni enables?
Yep. Yeah. So, from simply put, Omni exists to empower developers to build across all rollups, accessing all the users. That is why we built it. And really, it's an extremely developer-focused product because we started building this for ourselves, and we ended up committing to building it in a generalized form so other people could get the same utility of just make your application available across all these different rollups. That is what we do at Omni. That's what we care about. Um, and the goal really is we provide that utility to developers so they can focus on building the best application, running their preferred stack. But the what we need to do as an industry is make the users not think about like users don't care if like it's Windows or Linux running a website uh, on the web, and the same will apply in crypto. And so the goal is empower developers to the highest degree while giving them access to all the users, while making users not think about the nuances of this infrastructure stack. That's very much our design perspective at Omni.
Yeah, let's dive into the architecture a little bit here. I
Hmm.
was reading your docs earlier, and you guys have this kind of interesting approach to using Comet BFT and some of the Cosmos stack combined with, parts of the EVM infrastructure and allowing mostly Ethereum rollups. I think, at least in this current iteration, to participate in this network of rollups. Can you talk about the architecture and how Omni is constructed to enable this?
Hmm. Yeah. So there are two core primitives in the Omni network that facilitate this output of empowering developers to build across all these different rollups. One is a messaging layer, so that rollups can pass messages to one another, and another is a compute layer. And so this allows people to run like Turing complete applications. Um, that is the like very zoomed out two big architecture pieces there. Um, we can dive into each of them now. So the messaging layer is effectively a way that rollups can speak to one another. You know, if we're thinking in the Cosmos comparison, we've had IBC for a while. The difficulty with rollups today, though, as it stands, is most of them are servers. That is simply the reality. And so it's extremely difficult to let one server talk securely to another server with like so that end users can be confident in the like message that gets passed there. So Omni specifically is a way that messages can be passed securely to these from one rollup to another, actually secured by ETH, the asset itself. The other layer here is the compute layer, which is an EVM itself. We specifically built it as an EVM so that people in the Ethereum community wouldn't have to go learn a different language. And as they were expanding their applications across all these different rollups, they would just have access to the same tools and same programming language that they've used historically. So those are the two core primitives that give the output of like allowing developers to build across multiple rollups.
Okay, interesting. And so this interoperability feature, can you describe? Because I mean, coming from Cosmos, I think we're all very familiar with sort of IBC and how that works.
Hmm.
Did you guys build your own interoperability solution here, or are you using something off the shelf?
Yep, we built our own.
Okay, can you describe how it works and maybe like how similar it is to IBC or different?
Yeah, so I think the best way to understand the structural differences here with IBC, it's really nice because you have local validator sets anytime one chain wants to talk to another. So if a message is getting passed from chain A to chain B, that message is going to be able to be signed off by the validator set of chain A. And so it gives you uh, like proof that all of the participating nodes agreed that this is going to be part of the state transition that happened over there. We don't have that in the Ethereum world. And so uh, what we did instead is we kind of built like a global validator set in the sense that this is an independent network of people who are secure, like their nodes are secured with restaked ETH, and they are testing to state updates from Optimism, Arbitrum, Base, etc. And that is kind of where the crypto economic security is derived from. So instead of localized validator sets attesting to state updates, it's a global validator set that is like also secured by ETH, the asset itself.
Okay, so this global validator set is the Omni validator set. So I mean, validators are running Comet BFT. Um, you mentioned like Base Arbitrum. Does Omni connect directly to these these ecosystems, or does Omni allow basically sort of roll up as a service type, uh, well, like a roll up as a service where anyone can
Mhm.
build their own roll up? I mean, sort of, you know,
Yep.
what kind of users are we targeting here?
Yep. So, and this I think is one of the most interesting the biggest distinction with Omni compared to things like Polygon Ag Layer, the Optimism Superchain, all these different kind of like localized solutions, it specifically links into, it's like an overlay network. It links into each of these rollups, and it doesn't need for them to give up control over some part of their infrastructure stack. And the reason we built it this way is because it's the pragmatic path. We don't want to like build a solution that solves fragmentation, but it only solves fragmentation if you build a roll up on our platform. There's a number of, I mean, most basically every single other network is doing this. We did not do that with Omni because the reality is it doesn't solve the problem. If you're building an application, you want to access all the users and liquidity that are out there. You don't want to access some subset. Specifically, you don't want to access some subset of a new network. You want to link into the existing users and liquidity. And so we designed Omni so that Omni does not force rollups to give up control over their stack at all. And it empowers developers to link into the largest rollups that are out there today, as opposed to something like Ag Layer, which is quite cool, but it still is like a subset of the Ethereum world.
Right. So you could build an application on Omni and tap into liquidity from Base and Arbitrum and like any roll up on Ethereum. And this kind of, I think, is different from the way we've thought about building applications so far, is to have outposts. So you build an application, you'll have your application deployed on every one of these networks. Whereas here, a developer builds their application, deploys it on Omni, and then can tap into liquidity from all of these different networks. Is that the sort of accurate way to think about how Omni sort of flips
Yep.
that model?
Yeah. So a simple way to conceptualize this is Omni works really, really well for applications that want to accept collateral across all these different rollups, but not have fragmented state or liquidity. So let's think just concretely here about what a perps protocol could look like. Anytime you're trading perps, you're going to deposit collateral. If you were using Omni, the outposts, like the deployments on these different rollups, would just be like deposit and withdrawal for collateral. Those collateral updates would be sent to the Omni EVM though, and that is where you could have this global market where you're accepting liquidity deposits from all these different rollups. And so that is how we like think about this, in the sense that like you can accept and withdraw collateral across all these different rollups, but you want to keep global state somewhere. And so that happens on the Omni EVM for your application. And that makes it so that you don't have to deal with like fragmented redeployments of your application, this outpost type pattern.
Okay, interesting. So in my mind, when I was first researching Omni, I kind of thought it was similar to, I mean, I guess it is maybe in its architecture, but I think in the outcome, it's a little bit different. I thought it was similar to Initia, where on Initia, you have this kind of like shared settlement layer and sequencer and interoperability layer that allows you to build and deploy your own custom application on this rollup as a service infrastructure. Whereas Omni feels more like an interoperability solution, or like an interoperability layer across different rollup ecosystems that allows developers to build applications that tap into that existing liquidity and like build kind of like cross-chain applications in the Ethereum ecosystem. Is that like a fair way to compare those two?
I would say the Initia comparison is semi-accurate, but the like interop, like cross-chain, we don't think about it as cross-chain applications. I think that is necessarily implies that people have to think about the chains. And
Right.
I think that's the wrong design perspective, because users don't want to think about the chains. If we're actually going to expand the users in the space, they can't think about the chains. That has to be abstracted. So Initia, I think, is honestly an interesting example of a project that we talked about. It's like, okay, everything we've learned over the past 9 years or so since we've launched Ethereum, if we could rebuild things from scratch, what would it look like? I think Initia is kind of an example of a project pursuing this path. With Omni, though, it's a more like, all right, we got what we have. Things might not be perfect in the Ethereum ecosystem, but all the users and liquidity are in the Ethereum ecosystem. So how do we provide developers with a way to build across all these different rollups so that in the future they can, like any user that enters the space, it doesn't matter whether it's on like Polygon, Base, etc., that can be abstracted from the user and they hear about an app, they can just go use it out of the box. So Omni is like part playing nicely with the Ethereum ecosystem and making it so that the user experience can be abstracted while still empowering developers with access to all those users. Initiative is trying to build it on its own, and I think it's a fascinating experiment. Um, but yeah, there's two different like go-to-market strategies here, effectively, if
Yeah.
you think about it.
Yeah. Speaking of playing nice with Ethereum, um, I think currently Omni only supports EVM rollups.
Mhm.
In the future, are you guys planning on also enabling non-EVM rollups, potentially, Cosmos app chains or, Solana VM L2s to also tap into this network?
Yep, 100%. And so this is something actually that we were very intentional about making sure the network would be compatible with different virtual machines. And because we saw that, uh, sure, the first rollups were probably going to be EVM, but like people are going to play around at this level. If we can decouple this like consensus from the execution side, people are going to play around with execution and see what different types of virtual machines we can bring into play. And so back then, one of the ones that was more top of mind was Starkware, and think like, okay, this is an interesting early experiment in terms of different virtual machine architecture, but there's going to be more. And so Omni is intentionally fully decoupled from a virtual machine. It's pretty lightweight in order to kind of rewrite the interface that links into each of these different rollups if it's in a different language. But initially rolling out the network, it's just like it's a large scale network, reduce complexity where you can, start with just EVM.
Yeah. How much of that ability to work with other VMs is attributable to the fact that you're using ABCI++? Of course, maybe just taking a step back here,
Mhm.
ABCI++ is the infrastructure layer that sits on top of Comet BFT that allows Comet BFT to talk to an application. Up
Mhm.
until now, it has been used primarily in Cosmos chains to talk to the Cosmos SDK, but with ABCI++ 2.0 is now more modular ready in
Mhm.
its ability to talk to other frameworks. So end of end of parenthesis. How much of that ability to tap into other VMs comes from this ability, this use of ABCI 2.0?
Yeah. So it ABCI 2.0 does not directly facilitate this, but the design methodology that led us to using ABCI 2.0 did lead us to do this, which is basically just like clean abstractions. Like where can we isolate functionality and have specific components do their thing really well while leaning on other components to do things like totally different responsibilities very well. And so, yeah, Omni it introduced a new chain architecture. Historically, we've seen many different chains try to create a fast finality EVM. And historically, there's been a lot of struggles here, specifically because people try to rebuild EVMs on top of the Cosmos SDK. And these are very different. They have like different state representations. There's very different constructions in the mempool. Yeah, it just like historically, from a literal engineering perspective, has been riddled with difficulties. And so what we did instead was ABCI 2.0 came out, which is this nice clean abstraction between like, all right, we have a consensus engine. Like we can push the outputs of that elsewhere into a different execution client. Um, and then similarly on the kind of EVM side of the world, there's the engine API, which is kind of like the ABCI 2.0 equivalent, but for execution clients. And so what we did is we built an architecture where these could like talk with one another. And so that allows us to get the best from the consensus side as well as the best from the execution side. And it's a really nice, clean pattern because we get to get an extremely battle tested yet performant consensus engine. And then we also can use just literally right out of the box Geth EVM implementations. And so it allows us to, we kind of touched on this earlier, it allows us to lean on the work of other open source contributions in the space. And this is something that yeah, like our implementation of this is open source. It's something that we think is really important for the space to have as a primitive to build so that we stop kind of like trying to rebuild different ways to get a fast finality EVM.
Right. Okay. Is this Ethereum Engine API sort of akin to Ethermint?
No, so Ethermint is an example of rebuilding the EVM on top of the Cosmos SDK. And
Okay.
then you
So
have
it's
to like
complete. Okay.
a
Yeah. So
simple like
Ethermint
shit.
rebuilt the EVM, and you guys sort of built an API that allows you to use the existing EVM with ABCI.
Yep, exactly. A
Got it.
simple shapes way of thinking about it is you have Comet BFT. Ethermint rebuilt an EVM on top of it. We run it in parallel. And we didn't rebuild it. We just use like Geth or Reth as now that it's out.
Okay. Run it in parallel. What's
Similar
that
to the
mean?
way
Yeah.
Ethereum, so ETH 2.0 does this actually. It's like actually two
Yeah.
chains. There's like
Right.
a consensus side and execution side. Omni operates that same way.
Right. So you have the consensus client and the execution client. That API just allows you to do that and run. I guess this kind of like ties into my next question, which is this dual
Mm-hmm.
chain architecture,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
which I think is kind of related here. So what's the reasoning behind this design choice?
Mm-hmm.
Does it offer better performance or security than like using something like Ethermint, right, where the EVM has been rebuilt?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say the two most important things here are, well, three. One, battle tested. We get to use extremely tried and tested software that has been out there for a long time. On the Ethereum side, this is execution clients like Geth. On the Cosmos side, it's Comet BFT. So that's one. It gives us it reduces surface area for vulnerabilities. So security is improved through that.
Yeah.
Two, performance. If you rebuild an EVM on top of Cosmos SDK, it's going to get choked. And we have seen this. We ran this in our second testnet, actually. We were running Ethermint, and it got destroyed once we hit like a few 100,000 users. And a lot of this comes down from like having to translate state representations from EVM world to Cosmos world, but also the Cosmos SDK mempool is just not built for EVM scale load. And so from a performance side, what it allows us to do is put all the like heavy execution side things on the Ethereum client, while still having this like very fast, high performance consensus engine to get like 1 second finality for things. Those are two. I'm trying to think of what the third thing I was going to say is, but oh, the third thing is people throw around this idea of EVM equivalence. This is literally an Ethereum node. Like it is all the tools that are out there that are built for the Ethereum ecosystem will work fully out of the box. If you try to like rebuild things, often there are edge cases where it's like, oh, well, like this thing doesn't work super well with the Cosmos SDK. So you get close to like running a full EVM, but it's not 100%. And 100% is extremely important for like, no, literally every tool that's out there will just work out of the box with this.
Right. Earlier, we talked a little bit about restaking, and so far we talked a lot about the architecture. So now I'd like to understand how Omni is secured, and specifically, what's the role of restaking?
Hmm. Yeah. So the primary way it is secured is through restaking. As we were thinking about scaling our own DeFi protocol originally, like I mentioned, we looked at solutions that were on the market for like, okay, how could we like or what infra layers out there could we use that would facilitate this experience where we could just build across all these rollups and access all those users. Um, very like unimpressed, simply put. Like a lot of the solutions that are out there just are nowhere near what Ethereum developers would consider secure and safe. And so around this time, we met the Eigenlayer team. This was a couple years ago at this point. But it was very serendipitous in the sense that it kind of clicked. It's like, all right, we're trying to build an infra layer for the Ethereum network. Like it is a chain, but it's the first chain to complement Ethereum, not compete with it. Um, so when we met the Eigenlayer team, it's like, okay, naturally, if it's a chain that is built to complement Ethereum, it makes sense that these infra layers built around the core L1 network would also be secured by L1, the asset. On top of that, you get fantastic security properties because you can scale the crypto economic security far beyond a multi-sig, obviously, but definitely far beyond just securing it with your own native token. And so a lot of this it like clicked for us very early on. I think just in a weirdly serendipitous way, one of the most important applications of restaking happened to fit very nicely into the solution or into the problem that we were trying to solve. And so, yeah, how does restaking play into Omni? Omni is a network of nodes that provide infra services around the core L1 network, and they're secured by ETH, restaked ETH, the asset to derive crypto economic security. So that's the primary way that it's secured.
Right. So Omni is in effect an AVS on Angular. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it pulls in the security from restaking contracts. I think we've seen like Symbiotic recently. I saw earlier today they just passed $1 billion in assets supplied to the protocol. And so I think we are going to see this like concept of AVSs probably proliferate because there's a number of different restaking protocols at this point proposing like security offerings. So it will be quite interesting to see how they compete with one another. But honestly, it's healthy. It's cool to see different people coming at it with different perspectives.
Right. I mean, how do you see this market kind of evolving? Right, where there's several restaking protocols now, like Symbiotic's one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Will protocols like Omni AVSs choose to use the security of multiple restaking
Mm-hmm.
protocols? And then what are the considerations that a protocol has to take into account when choosing these protocols, quality of collateral, quality of
Mm-hmm.
like the validator sets, etc.?
Yeah. Yeah, this is a great question. It is my perspective that we're extremely early in the restaking game. Um, if you think about it, restaking isn't even here in the sense that we don't have slashing. If there's no slashing, there's no security. That is simply the reality. Um, and so, yeah, we haven't even had V1 really of any of these products shipped. And so I know that there's like $20 billion collectively in these contracts. Um, but that's, if we're being real, that is people farming tokens. Like those tokens aren't actually providing security today. That's a simple truth about it. So I think we're extremely early in this. I think it's healthy to see people trying to innovate on this idea in different ways. And if we go back, really, this idea, like, we've talked some about Cosmos in this. This idea of restaking got branded really well over the past 2 years in the Ethereum ecosystem, but it's been around, it was in Polkadot, it's been in the Cosmos ecosystem. So this idea has been around for quite some time. So I'm not surprised to see different teams experimenting with different methodologies. I can tell you from our design perspective at Omni, uh, we care deeply about permissionlessness of this. There should not be some multi-sig controlling all of it. That defeats the point in our purpose, or in our opinion. Um, there should not be forced rehypothecation. This is something that I think different networks or different restaking offerings are going to play around with. Um, and there should be slashing. Uh, there should be like simple slashing interfaces so that networks can design the best way for them. Um, yeah, there's going to be a lot that we'll see happen here over the next couple of years, but I think we're quite early in this game.
Yeah, I think so too. And I mean, of course, like Bitcoin restaking is also now playing a role in
Hmm.
like kind of pushing this restaking narrative to a different network with
Hmm.
arguably a lot more security and a lot more potential stake. So I think we will start entering into a world where there's like a marketplace of restaking providers that compete on quality of security, on fees, on liquidity, on all these sort of different properties.
Yep.
When thinking about I just had the Valence team on last week, and they're building like a really interesting marketplace for protocol owned liquidity. And the thesis
Mm.
here is that currently DeFi is mostly what you would compare to in sort of traditional finance is household debt, where institutional debt has not really entered the market, crypto institutional debt. And that's simply because we don't really have the protocols for that. We don't have sort of protocols that enable a marketplace of protocol and liquidity. In Cosmos, we're familiar with this idea of protocol and liquidity because like the Cosmos SDK has enabled and entered a lot of sort of deals with different networks to
Mm.
provide protocol and liquidity. But these have been mostly kind of manual, right? Um, what do you think creating more programmatic opportunities for protocol and liquidity to enter into the AVS ecosystem, the restaking ecosystem, what kind of exponential growth effects do you think that can have? You said we're still early, but like that liquidity boost, how much growth could that bring to the ecosystem, you think?
Hmm. Yeah, I've been chatting with a few different people about there's an interesting design space for aligning people who are securing the network with using whatever network it is. And so if you can align the liquidity, the capital that is securing it, and somehow facilitate that into the usage of the network, that is a super interesting space because there are, yeah, like I said, there's about $20 billion in these contracts right now. Um, I think protocol owned liquidity itself is an interesting idea. Actually, the DeFi protocol that we built kind of was an early iteration upon this, where it still wasn't like protocol owned liquidity. It was still renting, but it was like a way for these networks to create and establish liquidity on. It was kind of like a decentralized market making protocol where the DAO engages with this protocol and can source ETH from these different capital providers. I think protocol owned liquidity specifically is an interesting possible blurring of responsibilities where these networks themselves, many of them are far from product market fit and need to like iterate and innovate heavily until they like establish a solid spot in the ecosystem. When you think about protocol and liquidity, it's like a hedge fund. It's like now a DAO is controlling some liquidity. So it's interesting. I remember being extremely excited about this concept a few years ago. Um, but it is an additional responsibility for innovators to think about in these networks. So I think the more interesting question is how can we align the interests of people who are securing these networks with incentivizing them to participate in those networks themselves.
Yeah, I mean that liquidity provisioning can come with if you create programmatic agreements. I think you can include conditions for that liquidity provisioning to also come with certain conditions, right?
For sure.
Like this sort of like participating in governance, actively participating and deploying capital in different DeFi pools that may like need liquidity or market making. I think there's like a whole bunch of things that this enables that I find really fascinating. I think we'll continue to develop over the next couple of years.
I agree.
We're almost at the end here, but I did also want to. We talked about this a little bit, but this is a topic that I like to ask my guests about. And since Omni is sort of deep in the EVM ecosystem, what do you think are the prospects for alternative VMs that are gaining traction? The Move VM, the Solana VM, to some extent Cosm Wasm. And coming back to what we were talking about earlier with Ethereum having a lot of technical debt, I think the EVM also has a lot of technical debt. How do you think that will fare for the EVM in the next 10 years?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it is highly ambiguous. We will see what happens here. There's kind of two camps. There's one, it's like let's optimize the EVM, and this is with like optimistic parallelization, creating like database improvements. And this is kind of like say Monad, Mega ETH is another one. And so they're kind of taking a bet that the EVM is like JavaScript, and even though it is poorly designed from an objective perspective, they're going to optimize it, and it's just here to stay. And so the winners are going to be people or teams that optimize the EVM. There's this other camp of people experimenting with like Wasm VMs, Cairo from Starkware, Move, and they're taking a bet instead that L2s offer an interesting opportunity to, now that we have decoupled execution from the like consensus layer here in the Ethereum ecosystem, we can play around with new VMs. And so I think this is healthy. I'm excited to see the experimentation that happens here. I honestly don't know. The only thing that I would say I'm confident in is that on a 10-year time horizon, I do think we will reconsolidate around a single virtual machine architecture. We've kind of seen this in Web 2, where there's like an oligopoly of VM architectures. And so there's only a couple you need to think about, really. The rest are just super long tail and not used widely. I think just from the perspective of developer tooling, when you think about like how support, when you, maybe this will be different in 10 years with ChatGPT, but when you're picking up a new programming language, at least when I was in college, being able to Google a question and have a Stack Overflow post come up and somebody else who ran into that problem, it's extremely helpful as a developer when you're trying to learn a new system. And so there's a strong social momentum as well as like open source engineering momentum for these different architectures. And so I think we're going to see things expand and a ton of experimentation over the next like 1 to 5 years. And then on that 5 to 10 year horizon, I think we're going to contract heavily back to either one or just a couple virtual machine architectures for crypto systems.
Yeah, I think that sort of mirrors the way I think about it. And in Web 2, there is this oligopoly of essentially Node and PHP, and then for other more enterprise applications, maybe Java. And I hear you can get paid. You can get paid pretty well if you're a COBOL developer.
Yeah,
Like 100,000 a year.
that is a meme that I've heard since college. Like, hey, if you want to learn Fortran and work on some 70-year-old code, like, yeah, just like for some reason that's a meme all around. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think like just on that note, I think we will have experimentation with different languages in flexible environments, like if it's a WASM VM. But I do think that something like Move, which is specifically designed by these are top tier programming language experts. Like they came from Facebook and Facebook just fumbled the bag, but now it's this open source framework, but it's extremely high quality, something that like a tech titan would ship. So yeah, it'll be super interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah. Yeah, I recently had a conversation with Frederike Ernst of Gnosis on Epicenter, and we were talking about this. And I think one thing that kind of came out of that conversation that really shifted my perspective is AI, and the role that AI will play in really shaping the way we build applications. I also spent a lot of time in Stack Overflow and trying to like fix any sort of problem or like resolve any issue that I was having while coding. And I don't code so much anymore, but like I just built, we run a fund now, right? So like my whole life is in Excel, and I just built like this massively complex tool to track our portfolio, and like all the formulas were built in ChatGPT. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just kept like, and these are really complex formulas, right? Like, I built this thing to be modular and reusable, and so like I wanted it to work, like to be constructed a certain way. I was really thinking about it as like a programmer would, and ChatGPT built all of it. And I think that perhaps that tells us something about where blockchain development is going, and development in particular, in general. But it may very well be that at some point we abstract away most of the development language. You give a query, and that thing gives you up, like it produces opcodes, and you don't even have to think about a language. You could just like talk to a VM directly. So that might give us an indication about where things are heading. I think we'll probably have programming languages for a long time, but there is a possibility that also gets abstracted away. I don't know to what extent this actually came into reality, but we interviewed Emin Gutsier, Sonny and I in Barcelona at their Avalanche event like 2 years ago, and they were building this kind of like LLM on a blockchain. I don't know that they actually like ended up building this, but this was kind of the idea, right? Where you could give a prompt, and that prompt would get translated directly into opcodes and transactions. So
Yeah.
that's sort of like thinking very far ahead, but where we might be heading.
Yeah. It's possible that we start with like opcode level stuff like assembly, and I'm speaking outside of crypto. I'm speaking about just software engineering in general. It's possible that it started with assembly, then we created incremental abstractions, so we got to things like JavaScript. It's possible we end up at English, and when you program in
Yeah.
the future, you just speak in your like native human language. We'll see what happens here. I think that is definitely possible though, because yeah, like I think we're at the stage where you need to be an engineer to be able to talk to Chat GPT and kind of like at least string the things together and identify what it's doing wrong. But I imagine we will pass that point in the next few years here.
Yeah.
But right now I feel like I mostly participate the like protocol research and like architecture side on engineering. I don't really code anymore. But like some weekends when I've experimented with like, all right, how good is this thing as like co-pilot? It's good. It's quite good, especially when you're
Yeah.
like picking up a new stack.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's impressive how, in just a few short years, how good it has gotten us at coding. Well, Austin, thanks so much for coming on. Where can people find out more about Omni, and maybe, yeah, if you have any sort of announcements to share or any upcoming things people should be looking out for?
Yeah, sure thing. So, core website, omni.network, Twitter, Omni FDN, like Omni Foundation. And then, yeah, upcoming testnet, here, super excited to have this like final lap taken to test out all these infrastructure pieces. Um, yeah, and I'll be in Brussels. So if anybody's there, say hi.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I've seen a lot of these Twitters FDN. I thought it meant fully decentralized network. I didn't realize it meant foundation.
That's
But
funny.
yeah, all right. I guess that also works.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, looking forward to seeing you in Brussels.
Cool. All
Thanks for
right.
coming
Thank
on.
you very much, man.
Cheers.